Since the beginning of time, the age-long argument has been whether man gets to control his future or not. The answer is yes and no. Man gets to control his future by the choices he makes. As an individual, a third party can alter the future of another man by changing his choice slightly. Even if a choice is made a few minutes or a few seconds earlier, this results in a whole new story for the individual and the people who his choice affects. I am one of the watchers, MissedThePart. Join me as we search the multiverse to see how one man's choice can completely change another man's life trajectory. It is 1943 and hopes are high for Team America to have their very own super soldier. Today, Steve Rogers becomes Captain America. What if the Hydra agent, Heinz Kruger, was a little edgy and impatient that day? What if he did not want to wait for the experiment to be over before he attempted stealing the serum, because he had a generalized anxiety disorder? Let us watch and discover how the slightest change in the timing of Heinz Kruger's choice affects the future of Steve Rogers. Today was a dream come true for Steve, the day he became a super soldier. As Peggy Carter drove him to the laboratory for the experiment, he thought of how far he had come as a small, skinny man. This would be the day he finally achieved his dreams of being able to fight for America, and he would have Peggy by his side while doing it. All this was dependent on the success of the experiment, but he had enough to trust Abraham Erskine. He was even putting his life on the line for him. When they arrived at the lab, which was well disguised as a shop front, Abraham Erskine wasted no time in getting Steve Rogers ready. A few minutes later, and everything was set. Steve Rogers was strapped in pretty well to the machine, and the process to make the world's first super soldier began. In the midst of the spectators was Heinz Kruger, a Hydra agent. He would have fitted in perfectly well with the spectators of the experiment, only that he was fidgety and sweating profusely, which attracted some suspicious glances. Even though all of his attention was on the experiment, he was sent by Jonathan Schmidt to kill Abraham Erskine and steal the super serum, but all the anticipation and anxiety was getting to him. He had a generalized anxiety disorder as a result of the incident in his childhood. He tried breathing evenly to slow this heartbeat and calm his nerves, but it was not working. He could not take any more of it. Halfway through the experiment, Heinz Kruger busted through the crowd and with the trembling and shaking fingers pulled the trigger of the gun he pointed to Abraham Erskine. He missed. The bullet penetrated the control panel of the machine and caused a spark reaction, which did not only stop the experiment, it went on to electrocute Steve Rogers. Heinz Kruger had been more lucky in his next shot as he killed Abraham Erskine. But his luck immediately ended when Peggy Carter gunned him down. As Peggy turned along with the spectators to witness what had happened to Steve Rogers, the horror in her face questioned whether it was Heinz Kruger's luck that ran out of hers. Steve Rogers finally woke up from what seemed to be an eternal sleep. His vision was the first sense that came back to him. Though blurred, he could make out that he was in a hospital with a weird bracelet around his hand. He also vaguely noticed that the clock by the right-hand side of the room read that the year was 2009, but he could not make sense of it yet. When his other senses returned to him, he saw a group of men around him. When he noticed that they had Hydra symbols, he charged at them, but they immediately injected something into his body. Steve noted with a mild amusement as he faded from reality. That was when he charged. Electricity seemed to be bouncing off of his body. For several days, Steve Rogers faded in and out of consciousness as the Hydra agents worked on him. They were brainwashing him, training him to become their own super soldier. When Steve Rogers finally awoken, he was no longer Steve Rogers. "His name shall be Shocker," said the main Hydra scientist as he beamed down on his creation. Time was not a factor to Steve Rogers anymore. He could not remember where he came from, who he was, and who his loved ones were. The only thing that mattered to him currently was the mission. He was to kill a government official and his entire family. No witnesses. Steve Rogers waited patiently on the rooftop without moving a muscle. He had been waiting for 8 hours, but it took a toll on him. He did not show it. He remained rigid as a statue under a camouflage of leaves with a sniper in his grasp. Suddenly, the car he had been told to target turned the corner. He aimed and fired. His aim was perfect. The driver was eliminated, and without him, the car tumbled till it came to a halt when it collided with a tree. Steve Rogers jumped off of the roof with a jolt and slowly descended with his electrical volts. He sucked up the energy from the streetlights as he went to complete the mission. As Steve was ready to go, a shield came out of nowhere to catch him off guard, but his brainwaves were so much faster than the average man. Steve Rogers caught that shield and threw it back at his attacker, with a little bonus, 1,000 volts of electricity. When Steve saw who was attacking him, he had a sudden flashback. When Captain Carter recovered from her parole, the assassin was long gone. Something about him looked weirdly familiar to her. It was a full moon, and Steve Rogers was in Egypt for a very important mission. He was to retrieve an ancient artifact to strengthen Hydra's arsenal. He had been having strange flashbacks ever since seeing Captain Carter's face. The flashbacks occurred as agonizing fits for Steve, as his sanity was threatened each time they occurred. By the time Steve made it back to the Temple of Khonshu, he was in deep agonizing pain as he had flashbacks, with his sanity slowly slipping away. He could feel his brain burning up from the inside, and he cried. Then a bright light shined, and he closed his eyes to defend himself. When he opened them, he beheld an amazing sight. The god of the moon suddenly appeared and offered to cure Steve if he accepted to becoming Moon Knight. Steve had no choice. The head eggs didn't let him understand what was getting to him. Steve remembered everything, or he thought he did. He remembered having a friend named Bucky and loving a woman named Peggy. He remembered faintly that he had done something hideous and abnormal. Otherwise, why was he running all this way to Egypt to avoid them? Steve woke up, suddenly dressed in some hideous pajamas. He just had the strangest of dreams. He infiltrated a secret organization named Hydra. He killed and destroyed everyone in the facility. Laughing it off, he stepped down from the bed and went to prepare himself for the day's work at a museum when the headlines of the morning news from his television froze him. It read, "Secret Hydra facility in shambles after electrical blackout with no survivors to tell the tale." Just a slight change in the timing of a choice can change the entire outcome of the story of another man. Steve Rogers in this reality was meant to become Captain America, but a slight change of timing changed his trajectory entirely. He became Moon Knight, and that is going to be, what if Captain America had become Moon Knight? What if Steve Rogers had a different path set out for him? Now, a lot of this timeline could be explained further, and if you guys would like a part 2, let me know in the comments down below. That being said, this is season 1 to my brand new What If series, rebooting the entire stuff of What If. A lot of it will be spin-offs, some of it will be connected. So I do want to say, will this one be connected? You might want to ask yourself before considering a lot, because I did take out a lot of the story to really show what could have happened. There's a lot of questions with this story, but that being said, how did you like it? If you guys did, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn your notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. That being said, thanks for tuning in, and have a fantastic day.